Time once again for Community Forum, and we're very lucky to have back with us live in the studios this morning, Suzanne Cook. Suzanne Cook is the new co-chair of the Washington State Department of Corrections Statewide Family Council, and we are going to be talking about issues that she and the rest of the council and family members of those incarcerated are wrestling with on a daily basis. Suzanne, thank you very much for coming and spending time with us this morning.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it.
So start out, tell us about the Statewide Family Council and how you got involved.
Well, the Statewide Family Council was created, I believe, about 12 years ago. And at the time, it was Secretary Vail, Eldon Vail, who felt that it was important to have family members as stakeholders in DOC's processes. And so he wrote in policy to allow each facility, there are 12 prison facilities in the state, to assemble a local family council that meets at each facility every other month. And then those representatives come to the statewide council to bring facility issues into the bigger picture. So the statewide family council meets every 2 months. It is a public, open meeting, and anyone is welcome. There is the representatives from each local council basically are the voting members of the larger council, and then there's a secretary and a co-chair. And the co-chair is there to help build the agenda, help facilitate the meeting, work with DOC to make this meeting as functional and effective as possible. So every year there's an election, and I was elected as the co-chair for this coming year. So it's a good position to have, I think, to simply be in that seat and be able to watch and help this meeting do the best it can do, you know.
And you co-chair with one of the Department of Corrections people.
Correct. So there is a Department of Corrections co-chair, and there's a Department of Corrections secretary.
So you're representing the family viewpoints, and do you have any authority to make changes, or is it advisory?
It is an advisory position. Authority is from families is not necessarily a joint word. We are stakeholders. We are advisory. DOC still maintains pretty much complete control over just about everything. So we're there to bring these issues to this meeting. Hopefully we can, through these conversations, work out possibilities, solutions, resolution to issues that are going on. Typically there's a presenter that comes specifically about for instance, hearings. Not long ago, we had the headquarters person talking to us about hearings. And it's interesting for them to come because they're there to present to us, but the families are really there to discuss and have conversation and express our concerns about what they're doing and how they're doing it and how it plays out to our loved ones inside. We're there to challenge the status quo, I guess, which doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be implemented. So,
and the families, I would assume, have very specific issues to bring up from month to month with how their loved ones are being treated or mistreated in prison.
Yeah, the council, the statewide council, is more of a systemic view of things. You know, we don't each come with our personal one-on-one loved one issues. Many of those issues can be translated into systemic issues. But what's happened now because of the bill that was passed this year to bring in a corrections ombuds, she has been hired. She's building an office, and we are cautiously hopeful that her and it's not even, I think hers is also somewhat of an advisory role, but it is, she's reporting to the governor's office. The governor is her boss, and she's going to have the capability and the to actually go in, check these things out, receive these reports, complaints, issues, and begin to help develop solutions. For instance, one of the huge things that families and prisoners are dealing with are policy processes, like the hearings process, the grievance process, and of course, medical is the top complaint. People are sick, and they just simply are not getting the care that they need. There's it's called the Offender Health Plan, and it's a document basically of omission of care, because every other line says medically necessary. And so what does that really mean? Does medically necessary mean that you've had a heart attack and you're ready to die? Does it mean that I'm going to repair your broken finger? Does it, at what level is care? And so headquarters has created a care committee that, and I don't even know if there's any medical people on this committee, but they determine what's medically necessary. So there's this long process of just getting simple, basic care, along with the prisoner having to pay to see a medical person. So there's a copay for every single time a prisoner goes to see a doctor, and it's $4. So that's a lot of money when you're making 23 cents an hour if you have a job. Otherwise it's on the backs of families. So it's So we're hopeful that the ombuds will be able to take on some of these larger systemic pieces and help DOC revision them and bring a little more humanity to this agency that isn't very humane.
Well, I'm sure everybody listening can relate to how tough it is to get health care here on the outside, where the insurance companies are the ones that are the gatekeepers and traditionally deny people coverage for numerous things. And even when you're your own advocate, I can only imagine being a prisoner and trying to do that and having very limited access to these professionals and or pseudo professionals.
And the conditions of prison. We out here are able to have a little choice about what we eat and what how we live and what our environment is like. And, we have there is a level of control that we have, but inside there is no control. And so a prisoner has to basically give over everything to the conditions they're in. A prisoner, an elderly prisoner, is considered, 50 years old. So, the stress and conditions of prison take away a lot of life from people. And so, there are chronic prison illnesses, the heart disease and Diabetes is a huge one, and high blood pressure, and on and on and on. Besides just normal kinds of illness, and so it's a big deal, and yet there's very little ability. And what DOC ends up doing is choosing medications. So it's a huge pharmacy, pharmaceutical. There's lists and lists of medications that my husband is on due to the number of chronic illnesses that he has developed over the 26 years that he's been inside. So it's a little brutal in there, and now the ombuds is hiring a specific assistant, a medical ombuds, to receive those complaints, as well as she's hiring an assistant ombuds for the eastern side of the state and the western side of the state, an ombuds assistant for the sort of disenfranchised within the system, the LGBTQ community within the women. Very, very different needs that are really not seen by DOC very well. So the ombuds is kind of assembling on the basis of a survey that she sent out to families, and now is receiving this information and saying these really are the core issues, and this is what we need to address. So
Family Council will be working with the ombuds?
Family Council will always be, yes. We actually was written into the bill that families are a stakeholder. So, the union, DOC, families, the prisoners, and then it all reports to the governors. It is in the governor's office. So we're encouraged by this, and, it's going to take some time to get it off the ground, but the office is being built and fortified, and we are going to continue meeting with the ombuds to help her see some of the issues beyond what she can see, fortify her ability to see the issues.
And it should be reiterated that you and other advocates for prisoners were the ones that really brought the whole ombuds position about.
Absolutely. I have to say that Disability Rights Washington was very involved in this last round of push to the legislature, and I would say also the flip in the legislature in not this past election, but in the 2016 election, really shifted the committees that would support this. And so we finally got into a position where our legislators were in their own position to help make it happen. So, we're really grateful for that moment in time that helped, bring it to be. I mean, it took 15 years of going to hearings, testifying, bringing bills forward, and I learned a lot about bringing a bill into being, and it's not an easy process. So we're really grateful to our legislators for making this happen for us. I think that we all see that it's a huge need,
One of the other things you and your allies were key in was, and I heard from you before we went live that she's working on another report, but the report that Loretta co-authored about the food situation there, it directly ties to the health issues you were just touching on. Can you touch on that?
Yeah, so there was a food report created by Loretta Raffay and the Prison Voice Washington, and it was actually in response to the governor's executive order 1306 that basically said all state agencies must provide a base of nutritional food to its residents, clients, captives, and so the report that was produced was a historical view of the food in the prison and how correctional industries, once they stepped into the scene, has really changed the food, basically creating food factories, removing all food production from each facility. And so it's processed, packaged, sent back out, shipped around, and it's really horrible food. So out of that, and what we've seen in those 2 years now that food report was written, very little has happened. And the biggest change happened when there was a prison food strike in Walla Walla earlier this year in April. And, it's just this constant push to really just get some basic nutrition and a look at how the lack of nutrition feeds into this chronic health issues and the medical expense, and how do we determine, the cost in medical care because of the food issues. Well, DOC doesn't keep track of those measurable things. So now this year, Loretta's taken another step at it with regard to families and the relationship that DOC forces upon families and their loved ones inside, and the repercussion or the consequence of their policies, and the cost that families bear, the advocacy that we have to do simply to get basic care for our people. So another report is being written, and I imagine that, as we know, Loretta's a pretty thorough researcher and garnering of people's information and circumstances, and she's going to put together a pretty incredible report that will allow the public, once again, to get a broader and more in-depth look at the realities of prison.
And the realities, again, for the families, because as multiple family members have noted in the past, it's like the families are also serving time as well as those that are behind bars currently. For instance, I know from reading your posts that it is not uncommon. Your husband is over on the other side of the mountains. It is not uncommon for you, on the limited days that you can go, to travel across the mountains only to arrive and find out that you can't see him at the last minute.
That has happened. And we have tried to implement or asked just another piece of DOC that we feel does not value the family as much as we'd like. So there's a Twitter feed that they've created, and now we actually got them to get a text messaging system, and it still is delayed. It's not working well. You get across the mountains, and it's still closed, and you may not have gotten that information. But the cost is beyond that. I can say a personal cost for me is this expense to cross the mountains, get a hotel, pay for gas, risk the mountains in the winter. But beyond that, it's, because the food is so bad that we have to purchase commissary foods. I have to send him money so that he can actually purchase things that he can, fix in his cell. He doesn't have to eat the food on the main line, because a lot of it makes him very sick. And I know it does for a lot of people. And so the cost to the family, the burden has been placed on us, co-pays for medical, shoes, it goes on and on, toiletries, He has to buy all his own soap and his toothpaste and his toothbrush and his, all the things that we have to buy out here, he has to purchase inside. So that money, unless he's making, the maximum amount of $50 a month for perhaps a job that you might get, which he won't because he has chronic illness and he can't work. So that burden's placed on me. And then on top of that is the 25% deduction of monies coming in. It buries families. It really does. And then phone calls you pay for, emails you pay for, everything, every piece of communication that we are privileged to have is a cost to us.
And can't those communications be shut off for various reasons with no notice?
Indeed, they can. And one of the issues that we're dealing with right now, JPay is a vendor that is the email, send money, that process. They've taken on that role. So this contracted vendor. So in that, families can only, if I want to send somebody else, put money on somebody else's, another prisoner's media account, or they're, giving them some funds for email, I can't do that. I have one prisoner that I can deal with, provide for, and that's it. And so in the last year, the department has spent numerous hours and I don't know how many dollars to convict families of putting money on a media account of another prisoner or sending JPay email stamps right? So now it's just this blanket 90-day suspension of your JPay account because you've violated the rules that are not well written. It's nowhere. JPay is never mentioned in any policy, and so family becomes part of the convicted as well. And that's the piece that's really, really we'd like to change. We'd like to see changed. And I don't know how that's going to happen. But it's just this, you mentioned before that we're prisoners too. And I kind of like to call us the roving prison because we follow our people around. They move our family members at a whim, around the state. And we have to move with them. Whether it's actually physically moving or then having to make that drive across mountains and what have you.
And again, I know, because I follow your posts, that in your situation, your husband had numerous medical issues and they had moved him to different facilities and you didn't find out till well after that had happened, even though you're married.
Yes. Yeah, there is no, for security reasons, safety and security, that's the mantra, there is a very, very limited notification process. So the only reason why I would know that my husband were moved or transferred is that I'm involved. There's no notification process, even though I have a directive to receive information from him. I'm also power of attorney, and I'm also his wife. And so that's a huge issue. And we don't know what the avenue in on that one is to get DOC to understand the implication of notifying family. And the notification process, even if a prisoner dies, the notification process is so inconsistent. And so, if a military guy dies, they come to your door and inform you in a heartfelt way. Well, you might even get a call 24 hours later, or you might, there's no consistent way that DOC has formulated to facilitate families receiving that kind of information or notification. So my husband has been taken off grounds to hospitals a number of times, and I've never been notified. I only find out when he returns. So if he dies, right, or some horrible thing happens, I'm not going to know, which is pretty horrendous.
And again, you're speaking as someone who is highly knowledgeable, highly involved in this process. And you have to imagine, for family members that don't have your experience and your knowledge, that it just must be really frustrating. Really
frustrating. And I would say to those families, get involved with your local family councils, which is where you meet other families. Get involved with the Statewide Family Council, which is where you meet other families and DOC representatives. So you begin to build relationships that will be helpful, because when you're standing on the outside, it's a horrendous agency to try to navigate and get the necessary information and needs met.
Is that information and access available only to family members, or can friends and or advocates for people on the inside work in that system?
Well, the information I've been doing this for 15 years, and it has taken this long, really, to understand the players. And of course, the players inside always change. They move their jobs around just as much as anybody else. So, but what the biggest difficulty is kind of this fear base of families not knowing how to enter the system, not knowing how to get that information. It's not offered. And so families who are not savvy really have a very difficult time. So, our support, families who have done this, who know what's going on, who can advise, who can direct them to a person who might be in charge of something that they are involved with, those are the kinds of things that help build up families' courage to step in and advocate, because, it's not an easy thing. It's a very daunting agency. And our people are at the other end of it, receiving retaliation and receiving harm based on advocacy. So, that's a whole other story, but it does happen. And it's a common knowledge. And there are many prisoners on the inside that will say, don't say anything, let's just let it go, blah, blah, because they'll get the brunt of it. So families are in this very precarious place to advocate or not advocate.
All right, we were just about out of time. How can people who are listening find out more about the Statewide Family Council and or resources you'd recommend?
The DOC website actually has a pretty thorough pages of information about the councils and the facilities, and all of that information is on the DOC Corrections website. That's probably the easiest way.
Well, with that, we're out of time. I want to thank you very much for coming and spending time with us.
Thank you so much, Mike.